Right, guys, we're back in the shop today, and I'm super excited today because today we are doing Tire Fight Episode 4.
Okay, time out. This is a 38-minute video and there's tons of information on these three tires. If you don't have the time for the full review of these three tires, I have time coded the different sections of this video and you can jump ahead to the interesting parts or the parts that you find interesting. Thanks for watching, guys.
Now, in the previous episodes of Tire Fight, we always take two like tires, so two motocross tires or two gummy tires, and we compare them back to back. So what I mean back to back is we have multiple sets of rims, and we have the tires get mounted up, and then I literally swap wheels and tires on the trail or on the track to get really good feedback between tire A and tire B. For this episode, doing it a little different. Been working on this episode for a while. We're actually going to test three tires back to back. I should say I've already tested three tires back to back, 10 hours or more each. And so for this episode, really excited. It's kind of a three-way tire fight. And yeah, let's get into it. So for this episode, we're going to test three tires. You could call them light tires because they're all soft, kind of hybrid gummy tires, but they're pretty different in the price range, and they're pretty different in maybe how they're perceived by riders. But I was really excited about these three tires for different reasons. So the first tire is a Dunlop AT81 EX tire. This is a very good tire. I've run it before. This is my second AT81, and I bought this tire specifically to do Tire Fight Episode 4, which is this episode. We're going to compare it directly to the Mitas 454 Sport Extreme, what do they call it? Super Soft. Yeah, so it's another hybrid gummy tire. And then we're going to compare these two tires to finally the Tusk Recon tire, which is maybe like a budget trail-oriented tire. Now, these tires vary a lot in price. I try not to put price into the equation, but it's almost hard to ignore price for this tire fight. So definitely the least expensive tire is the Tusk Recon. Crazy value for the money. I will just tell you that right now. And then you could probably say that maybe the Dunlop AT81 is the next expensive tire. This is also a very expensive tire that's north of $100 retail. And then the Mitas 454, this is also north of $100, and they can be kind of hard to find because they are made in the Czech Republic, and I think they're not imported in huge volumes. But they're light tires in the sense that they're gummy, but as I go into this review, or this tire fight, I should say, you'll see that they're actually all very different tires. And yeah, they're very good. They're all good in unique ways. I definitely will pick a winner. So in the Tire Fight series, what I do is I take a systematic approach, right? I ride all these tires 10 hours at areas that I ride very repeatedly. So I have test tracks here, and then I have trail systems here, which I ride a lot. And so it's a very consistent routine. And then I swap these tires out and I kind of capture my feedback. And then at the end of the 10 hours for all the tires, I come back and I give them a score. Right, we grade them on performance, on the different characteristics of performance, and I'll pull a table up here, and then I grade them on performance across different terrain types. And the idea with Tire Fight is I pick a winner, a definitive winner, but I also want to give you guys kind of my opinion or my kind of takeaways for each tire that I test, right? So yeah, you would be surprised what you learn when you can literally ride a trail, take a tire off, put on another tire, and then go ride. You get to really see what the difference in tire does. And these are all just rear tires. We hold the front tire consistent with a Michelin Starcross 5, which is one of my favorite tires. And I do mount both. I did mount these tires to my 300 SX and my 450 SXF. I ride mostly my 300 SX just because it's kind of my workhorse, but I will comment on that. So before we get into the episode, I want to say if you like this channel, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Helps me a ton. I'm working on getting my subscribers up. I also have a small company, 2stroke4strokemoto.com, that sells very cool little accessories and products for 2-stroke and 4-stroke dirt bikes. And it's just a tiny small company run out of my shop. go check out our products. I think some of you guys might like that stuff. So let's get into the testing, and yeah, here we go. So for this episode of Tire Fight, I'm going to do things a little differently. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just by sharing my first impressions as I worked my way through each tire. And I think that's important because when you mount a tire and you go ride on a trail that you know, those first impressions are really critical in kind of like setting your tone for what you think of a tire, or in setting your expectations of a tire. So to me, I feel like first impressions are critical, right? Because you go buy this tire, it's brand new, you put it on, you're super excited, and it's like the first thing that kind of comes out, right? So I mounted all these tires on at the same time onto different wheels, but I worked my way through. I didn't work my way through 10 hours through one tire and then 10 hours in the other. That's not the point. I would put one tire on for some time, and then maybe a couple hours, and then swap another one, and then swap another one. And so again, it's a back-to-back testing to get really good, consistent kind of feel for how the tires compare relative to each other. So the first tire I started on was the Tusk Recon, and the Tusk Recon, it's an interesting tire. I think this tire, I think I paid $68 shipped to my house, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. I mean, I have bought mountain bike tires that are much more expensive than $68. And my first impression when I mounted it is like, wow, this tire is just so big, you know. And I'm not a person that loves giant, big, heavy tires. I did weigh these tires relative to these other assemblies, and yeah, this wheel assembly is 2 pounds heavier than the 4x4 and the AT81EX. Same rims, same spokes, same sprockets, same hubs. So that was kind of like a concern for me. I was kind of like, wow, this is a really big tire and it's really heavy. But I looked past it. I mounted it and I started my testing here on my tracks, and I was really pleasantly surprised. Like it definitely feels a little big and a little heavy, but it has really good traction. It has, good cornering, not like obviously moto tire cornering, but you don't feel any like massively excessive rolling in turns. And I would say where it really shines, and maybe this isn't a surprise, is it really dampens impacts to the rear, and you get a lot of comfort out of the tire. It does slow the bike down a little bit. I mean, it's almost like having a recluse clutch on a bike. It kind of slows everything down, I think because of the mass and the size of the tire. But, on a bike like this that has so much power, it's not really you might notice it slightly, but it's not like a deterrent, right? I was, first impression was, wow, this is an amazing $68 tire. And if you only had $68 to spend, it'd be pretty hard to beat this tire for $68 shipped to your house. I think I bought this tire and then I bought like something else that was like $4. So Rocky Mountain shipped this tire because I cleared the $70 free shipping. So that was my first impression. My first impression was like, wow, this is better than I thought. And for $68, that's really that's a pretty incredible tire. All right. First impressions there. I rode that tire for about 2 hours, and then I moved on to the Mitas. I hope I'm saying that right. 4x4. Now this tire, this is an interesting tire. So this tire was recommended to me by B-Rad from B-Rad Products. He actually resells this tire. Yeah, I had never tried a Mitas tire. Actually, that's not true. I have a Mitas tire on my big dual sport bike, which is an awesome tire. But I had never tried an Enduro Mitas tire. And at first impressions, when you first receive the tire it looked like kind of like a little skinny and a little tall, relatively soft, maybe a little harder than the Tusk Recon, rubber-wise. But yeah, it looked a little different. It's got this really cool, really thick kind of bead around the, strong kind of bead around the tire. And so I mounted it up and I went to my track again, back to this tire. And my first impressions, I went to my figure 8 track. So my first impressions were, I wasn't blown away. It felt good. It rolled into turns, like motocross style turns pretty well. It did some kind of strange, kind of like it would roll and then it would kind of slide a little bit, and then kind of be a little bit unpredictable in turns, which kind of turned me off a little bit. But it didn't do anything crazy in either direction. I was like a little bit kind of, okay, well, it's cool. It's not a bad tire. And then I went to another small track that I have, which is more technical, has rocks and trials type obstacles, and I rode this tire, and yeah, it's kind of really started to come alive. So I start all my testing pressure at 10.5 psi, and that's where I try to run them. I dropped this pressure down a little bit. I ran it down to like 8.5 or 9, and the tire really woke up. It really started to grab better, and it started to flex more. And I will say, just over the time that I ran this tire, the more hours I put into it, the better the carcass started to feel. What stood out to me on this tire is the rubber is very good, has very good upright traction. It has a stiff carcass with relatively soft rubber, which was nice. And yeah, and my first impressions was I was pretty happy, pretty excited. It didn't blow my mind, but I was like, okay, yeah, let's give it a shot. So I went ahead and then went out to another area and rode at faster speeds, and that's where this tire really shined over the Tusk Recon. And I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that next. I think is as you get into much higher speeds, the Tusk Recon definitely starts to feel. You start to feel that size. You start to feel that inertia. You start to feel some wallow. You start to feel some. You start to feel some kind of instability. Let's call it through the sidewall. This tire really started to shine as you went higher speed. The carcass is stiff. It holds up really well to hard impacts. It feels much more like a racing tire. And so maybe past my first impressions, I would say my second impression was once you got this tire up to speed, I did that really well for a hybrid tire. I was actually really impressed. And as I look at this tire now, it wore the best out of any of these three tires. It has very good wear characteristics. So yeah, this tire actually started to shine a lot at higher speed. And at low speed, it's very good. It's a gummy tire. It's as good as any gummy tire at low speed. But at the higher speed, it also performed very well. It didn't get out of shape. And that's because of what I think is a stiffer carcass. So I began to like this tire more as I continued to test it. And the Recon, I actually started to like it less as I tested it more and as I got more into high speed. So that was kind of my first impression on the Mitas. And then, then I started interchanging these tires with the Dunlop AT81 EX. And one more thing I'll say about the Mitas is it didn't seem to like dry, deep silt. There's a lot of dry, deep silt here. It definitely didn't perform as good as some other tires that I've tested in dry, deep silt. So anyhow, then I mounted the Dunlop AT81 EX. Again, and I just want to emphasize this because guys get this wrong. This is the EX version of the AT81. This is not the tire that comes stock with your KTM. The regular AT81 is not very good. This tire is very different than that tire. It looks identical because the mold is probably the same, but the rubber is completely different. And don't let your experience with an AT81 cloud your judgment with an AT81 EX because they're different tires. Anyhow, first impression on the AT81 EX. First impression, rode out my track. It's kind of silty, rocky, and then there's trials, obstacles. It just eats up the silt. Just the way the tire, it's more like a paddle design, more like a squared off design. It does really well in silt and loose soil. It does really well, obviously, in rocks and in hard pack because it's a gummy tire. It's the carcass is somewhere in between, right? It's in between the Mitas and in between the Tusk Recon. It's not as stiff as the Mitas carcass. It has more flex to it. The rubber on this tire is just exceptional. Hooks up very well vertically, is extremely good in the turns. It is almost as good as a motocross tire in turns, in motocross type turns. So I have a figure 8 track here, where I can really begin to, really push the bike into the ground and really see what the tires are doing. And so very happy with that. My first impressions were that it's very good. It's very good all around. It's very good in silt. It's very good in rocks. It has very good impact absorption, right? Because the carcass is soft and stiff at the same time, if I can use that contradiction. Very good braking, like super good braking. And what I mean by good braking is you can get a long distance in the pedal stroke or in the braking of the tire before it starts to slide. And when it does start to slide, it's very predictable in when it breaks traction, and it's very easy to bring it back and regain some braking traction. Very good in braking. And I will say all these tires are very good in vertical upright traction. It's in the other areas where I think they're very different. That was my first impression on AT81. Yeah, very impressed with the AT81. So I think I'm going to roll in some kind of real-time commentary as I went through my first impressions to give you guys kind of real-time insight on some of these tires. So I'll roll that in now. I just put in maybe half an hour on this Tusk Recon tire, and there it is. I'll show it there. And yeah, let me give you my thoughts here. Grab a seat, I'm kind of out of air. Whew. Yeah, it's surprisingly good. I gotta say, it's surprisingly good. I was kind of skeptical because the tire is really big, and I was afraid of the bike pitching forward and throwing up, making an imbalance. And you feel it a little bit, but it's not bad really. You can kind of work around it a little bit, but the tire has lots of traction, surprisingly good traction for the dry conditions out here. This is kind of a traction, it's a friction tire. It doesn't really dig very well, but considering the conditions out here, it's actually grabbing up, it's hooking up really pretty well. When it's this loose, it's almost like you almost want a motocross tire to hook up super well. I would say the traction is very good. The size of the tire maybe slows the bike down just a little bit in kind of that hit, which really isn't that big of a deal off-road. The tire is a little bit squishy as you start going really fast and you start doing MX style turns, but it's that squishiness is very manageable. It's super predictable as you go into turns and you start to lose traction and you start to break traction and lean the bike further. It is very predictable in what it does, and I would say for that reason that quality offsets the squishiness of the tire. Yeah, vertical traction or upright traction is very good. It's a very comfortable tire. Like when you hit some of these big jumps, I just kind of over jumped that jump there. You kind of feel the rear tire give you just a little bit more suspension in the rear. Yeah, overall I'm pretty impressed. The biggest concerns I had were the size and weight of the tire, and honestly, like I don't think it's a big factor. Like, yeah, you lose a little bit of hit, but this is a 300 SX, right? It's a 250 XC converted to a 300 SX. It just doesn't really matter on this bike. I'm pretty impressed so far, and I'm pretty impressed how well it's doing in this powder conditions, which is not what the tire's for. So I'm gonna go play in the rocks a little bit more in some dry conditions and see how that goes. Probably go really well, and yeah, keep going. I don't think I'm gonna get any mud anytime soon around here, so we're gonna have to wait on that. But so far, I'm pretty impressed. For a budget tire, it's pretty darn good. And I would say it's good because it's extremely predictable. So yeah, there you go. All right, guys, I kind of wrapped up my testing for the day. I got some good time on this Mitas 454 tire. Yeah, it's an interesting tire. It's soft rubber, kind of a stiff carcass. It is super loose today, so I have to kind of interpret some of my findings with a grain of salt. What does it do well? I would say has extremely good vertical traction. It has very good kind of damping through rocks. It feels it has soft rubber but a stiff carcass, so it holds well in turns. Although I'm not entirely sure I like the way it leans into turns and the way it develops grip, but it is an enduro tire, so that's kind of to be expected. Yeah, I started at 10 psi and I dropped it down to 8
which I don't usually like to do, but it feels a lot better at 8. I think that carcass is really starting to kind of flex more and develop good traction in turns now. I like it. I think it's better, probably better than most tires. I don't know, I think it's pretty good. It's not super playful. It's not a very playful tire. I think that's kind of to be expected with big lugs and a stiff carcass. I also have a extra heavy duty tube in there for testing, which is what I test all tires with. So yeah, I don't know. It's not a bad tire. It's probably a very good tire. I still don't know. And I didn't get out of third gear today, so we'll see what happens when you get into fourth gear and go a little faster. All right, guys, just finished up morning testing on this Dunlop AT81EX. I put about, maybe a little bit less than 2 hours on it of fast riding out here on Central Oregon, which is today is hard pack, shaly, rocky terrain. Maybe not exactly what this tire is intended for, but I'll tell you what, it's a performer. Definitely shows signs of wear, but I gotta say, like, once again, I'm just blown away by this tire, and I'm not even a Dunlop fan. Like, I honestly, before this tire, I couldn't stand Dunlop. So this is an exceptional tire, and you know, comparing it directly to the Mitas 454, which I just pulled off, just as much traction, maybe even slightly more traction vertically. It's much more predictable in corners. It's super predictable in corners, where the Mitas, and the Mitas is back in there, where the Mitas really suffers, turn the camera up, where the Mitas really suffers is in really kind of fine dust or sand conditions. It just is not perfect. It's okay, it's more than okay, it's good, but it's not awesome. This tire, whatever I throw at it, it's good. And I mean, I don't usually say that, but man, this tire is just so good. It's such a well-balanced tire. I would say the only thing it does slightly worse than the Mitas is the Mitas 454 has a stiffer carcass. It holds up better at really high speed and really aggressive riding. This Dunlop AT81, you can get it to feel a little soft if you're hard on the gas coming out of a turn off-road, but it's just the slightest kind of wobble from that you get from soft tires. This tire is so predictable in the turns. It just completely blows me away. Such a good tire. I still have a lot more testing to do on it. I will admit that this is not the first AT81 that I have, AT81EX that I have. This is probably the second one I've run, and it's just as good as I remember. Yeah, I'm gonna have to test in different conditions, but I definitely went up some good hill climbs today, and some rocky, shaly, relatively nasty stuff. And you can just lug it, and it just grips, and you can just slip the clutch all day. It's a very, very good tire. If you're not a Dunlop believer, this tire might convince you otherwise, at least for this tire specifically. What a good tire. So kind of after the first impressions, I worked into kind of the 3 to 8 hour kind of range for each tire, swapping back and forth, and it's actually really fun to swap back and forth between tires. And yeah, I guess my takeaway is that these two tires started to really separate themselves from the Tusk Recon, at least for me and how I ride. So generally, I consider myself kind of an advanced, amateur rider. I'm not someone that stays in first and second gear. The terrain I ride is mostly rocky, sandy, silty, generally drier, kind of like Western United States type riding. And yeah, I again, these two tires separated themselves, in my opinion. They did fast really well. They did slow really well. Very predictable handling, especially with the AT81EX. Extremely predictable handling. The Tusk Recon,
at the lower speeds it was good. It was great value for money. But it didn't, I guess it didn't continue to impress me, right? I think it has a certain level of performance, and that performance is very good in the, let's call it maybe first through third gear, slow, technical, kind of trail ride terrain. And then at higher speeds, it just doesn't do anything really that exciting. And then, the Mitas and the AT81, really excel at high speeds. They're pretty different. I think they, what I kind of in the middle part of my testing, to me they handle MX style turns very differently. I think the AT81 is superior in MX style turns. It's more predictable how it rolls into turns and how it rolls out of turns and how it develops traction in and out of turns. The Mitas probably I would say does worse in MX style turns than the AT81, but it probably does maybe a little bit better in hard impacts in hard pack and developing traction on sharp edges potentially. Actually, I don't know. I wouldn't say it has more traction than the AT81. I would just say that carcass feels different and it feels like it's going to hold up better. I will say hands down where the Mitas does beat the Dunlop AT81 is in wear. It definitely wears slower. I would say probably much slower than the AT81. Neither of these tires lost knobs over 10 hours of testing, which is pretty remarkable where I ride and the speeds that I ride. As an example, like one of my favorite tires, an IRC VE33S, at 8 hours, I was missing multiple knobs at the speeds and the style that I ride at. These tires did not lose knobs, which is pretty remarkable for a hybrid gummy tire, right? To not lose knobs at speed. So then I continued down that path. I ended up putting just 10 hours on the Tusk Recon. I put 11 hours on the Mitas 454, and I went to maybe 13 hours on this AT81EX. And I guess I should probably get into the scoring at this point.
Okay, this is where I get to rate each tire and try to justify my opinion. Let's start with terrain and hard pack. I would say the Mitas 454 slightly outperforms both the Dunlop and the Tusk Recon. Generally, gummy tires have a soft carcass and they just don't like hard terrain or hard pack terrain. The Mitas is probably slightly better than both of these tires, or both the Dunlop and the Tusk. Now let's look at sand. I would definitely say the Dunlop outperforms both the Mitas and the Tusk Recon in sand terrain. The lug pattern is just different than the Mitas. It's more spaced than the Tusk Recon, and it just does better. I would say the Dunlop AT81EX in sand and on loose soils is so good. It's exceptional, and it's definitely better than the Mitas and the Tusk. Now let's look at mud. I would say, again, the Dunlop is better than both the Mitas and the Tusk Recon in mud. It's similar to the sand. The pattern on the Dunlop is just better in loose soils. It hooks up better. I will say the Mitas is probably slightly better than the Tusk Recon, but I wouldn't say enough to give it a half a point. Now let's look at technical terrain. So technical terrain is pretty broad. It's maybe trials, obstacles, hard, difficult, steep hill climbs, anything where slow speed is required and a lot of skill is required. I will say the Dunlop and both the Mitas are exceptional in that regard. That's really where they shine and what they're designed for. The Tusk is good. I would definitely say it's not exceptional. I think the pattern on it kind of holds it back a little bit. And just the size of the tire doesn't lend itself to be super precise in really technical, tight areas. Now the turn track. The turn track is there to simulate kind of MX style turns where you're really leaning the bike over, you're seated down, you're pushing the bike into rutted turns, and you're really asking a lot out of the tire. Basically for gummy tires, this is not where they excel. And so really, I think they're all pretty equivalent, to be honest. They all get a 3. It's just not what they're designed for necessarily. I think there's some subtleties there. I would say the Dunlop maybe is more predictable. Okay, now the performance ratings. I define upright traction as the ability for a tire to get just straight traction when the bike is completely upright. This is critical for hard enduro type tires where you're stopped and you have to develop a lot of traction in a short amount of time. Well, the Dunlop and the Mitas, they're just exceptional in this. I mean, that's kind of what they're designed to do in many ways. The Tusk Recon it's really not bad. I mean, it doesn't deserve a 3. I give it a 3.5 because it really is good and it really does shine in that manner. Now, fast turn grip. I define fast turn grip as turn grip where you're really leaning the bike over, you're seated down, and it's an MX style turn, and you're really asking a lot out of the tire. You're going fast, and you're asking a lot out of the sidewall of the tire. The Dunlop does very well for a hybrid tire. The Mitas does okay. I had some issues with it kind of not being very predictable, and so it gets ranked a 3. And then the Tusk Recon it's fine. It's predictable. It does things well. The sidewall is a little squishy when you get into fast speeds, and so that's why it gets a 3. But I would say the Dunlop outperforms the Mitas and the Tusk Recon, certainly in fast turn grip. Now let's talk braking grip. Braking grip is not just how fast the rear tire can develop grip under braking, but it's also the quality of the grip under braking. I would say the Dunlop surpasses both the Mitas and the Tusk Recon in this regard. It develops better braking grip across a larger range of terrain. It also gives you more feedback in the pedal, and it just gives you more grip in general when you're slowing down. The Mitas is close, but it suffers in sand and loose soils, and that's why I marked it down relative to the Dunlop. The Tusk Recon is just okay. When you ask a lot out of the tire when you're braking, it begins to wallow and squish around, and then the tread pattern just doesn't lend itself well to very, very loose soils. Now let's talk about predictability. This is one of my favorite traits. There's nothing worse than a tire that's unpredictable. And for me, the Dunlop wins hands down for predictability. You can put this tire exactly where you need it, and it tells you exactly what it's going to do before it does it. I just love this tire. It frankly just outperforms the Mitas and certainly the Tusk Recon in predictability. Now let's talk about wear. The Dunlop definitely suffers the most wear out of these 3 tires. I would say the Mitas is exceptional in wear for a gummy tire. I think this is its strongest selling point or strongest differentiator. It does very well for wear, has a very good carcass that holds up, and it's very impressive how well it does for a hybrid gummy tire. The Tusk Recon is fine. It loses its sharp edges pretty quickly, and then the knob pattern just doesn't lend itself to develop exceptional traction after you lose that sharp edge. But definitely the Dunlop suffers in wear. I guess you pay for that performance somehow, and it just is what it is. So here are the point tallies for terrain. The Dunlop is on top with 18 out of 20 points, followed by the Mitas at 16.5, and then the Tusk Recon at 15. Really what hurts the Mitas is just the performance in sand. It just doesn't do that well, and the Dunlop outperforms it in sand, and it outperforms it in mud. In performance, the Dunlop AT81EX also wins over the Mitas and the Tusk Recon. It has a 1-point advantage over the Mitas and a 2-point or a 3-point advantage over the Tusk Recon. Overall, the Dunlop AT81EX gets 36.5 points out of 40. That is an excellent score. The Mitas 454 is close behind, 34 out of 40, and the Tusk Recon wraps it up at 30.5 out of 40. To me, this feels about right. The Dunlop and the Mitas tires are both very good. In my opinion, the Dunlop tire performing better across a wide range of terrain, while the Mitas doing well but suffering in silt and sand, and just not having the same level of predictability in turns.
So there are the scores on the tires, guys, and just kind of some comments on the scoring that I do. So I like to keep the price out of the scoring intentionally. I like to just score each tire on terrain and performance. I try to be as objective as possible, not just relative to each tire, but relative to all the tires I've tested. If you look in the previous episodes, but ultimately, there is some bias, right? I am human. I have some bias, and to me, the bias is performance. Like, I don't really care to save $30 on a tire that I hate. I'd rather spend $40 more on a tire that I love than save $40 on a tire that I hate. So to me, just where I'm at in my life and how I ride and the budgets that I have, let's say, like, I just want a very good tire, right? And I love a tire that performs very, very well for the value, but ultimately, if I have to pick a tire to put on my bike, I'm going to pick what I think is the best performing tire given the terrain and conditions and style of riding. So that's just me. So if I have to pick a tire between these three wonderful tires, I will say I definitely, for me, it's a clear winner. And to me, the winner is the AT81 EX. I think the Mitas is a close second. I think it's a little bit different. I think it provides a different experience. I think the tire will probably last longer and still perform very, very well. I think the tire has some shortcomings in sand and loose silt, but outside of that, it's an exceptional tire, and I was very impressed. I would rebuy this tire for sure. And yeah, it has really good wear characteristics. Probably some of the best that I've seen in any gummy tire. But to me, the performer is the AT81 EX. It does slow well. It does medium speed well. It does high speed really well, considering it's a hybrid. It corners extremely predictably. It just gives you that confidence to do what you want to do, and it's just such a good tire. And this is coming from someone that does not like Dunlop. Like I do not like Dunlop tires generally speaking. I do not run Dunlop tires up front. I have had not awesome experiences with other Dunlop products. So to me, when I found this tire and I started to really test this tire, and again, this is my second AT81 EX. In fact, I have one mounted on my 450 there. I just love this tire. It's just such a good tire. The only downside really is cost and wear. And honestly, like for me, I'd rather spend $30 more and get a tire that I love. So that's just kind of where I'm at. Wear, tires, they just wear, and that's just the way it is. I have 13 hours on this tire. Yeah, is it worn? Sure. Is it still hooking up extremely well? Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, it probably has 80% of the traction it had when it was brand new. And I mean, I've beat this tire. Like I absolutely destroy tires out here. So if you haven't tried an AT81 EX, go try one. It's an exceptional all-around tire. Is it expensive? Yeah, sure, it's expensive, but everything is expensive now. And just the extra $30 you spend on a wonderful rear tire is just so much worth it, right? It's so worth just getting that experience. With that said, on the opposite side, if you only have $68 to spend, buy the Recon. It's a great tire, especially if you're only a trail rider. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that tire. And then the Mitas kind of falls somewhere in the middle for me. I like the tire. I don't think it does anything exceptional other than wear for a gummy hybrid tire. Yeah, I don't know. I think if you didn't have lots of silt where you lived, it might be better, at least for me. But yeah, no, I'm definitely happy with this tire. But I would take the EX AT81 EX over it any day. So there it is. Your winner for Tire Fight Episode 4 is a Dunlop AT81 EX. Exceptional tire. You will not be disappointed if you run this tire. If you can get past the price point and the maybe the wear characteristics on the tire. So there it is, guys. Thanks for watching.